Captain Lars Eriksson had sailed Arctic waters for 30 years, commanding cargo vessels through the treacherous routes between Norway and Russia, where ice could crush a ship and temperatures killed in minutes. When his shipping company assigned a predominantly Filipino crew to his vessel, the MV Norwegian, Lars made his displeasure known immediately. "These are tropical sailors," he told the operations manager. "They've never seen ice, never worked in sub-zero temperatures. Arctic shipping requires experience with extreme cold. This is irresponsible." The operations manager shrugged. "Captain, Filipino sailors crew 70% of the world's ships. They're professionals. They'll adapt." Lars wasn't convinced. When the Filipino crew boarded, led by Chief Officer Ramon Santos from Manila's, gathered them on deck in the Norwegian port. It was autumn, barely cold yet, maybe 5 degrees Celsius. Some crew members were already shivering in their jackets. Lars shook his head. "Gentlemen, this is warm compared to where we're going. Arctic routes reach -30, -40 with wind chill. Seawater freezes, metal becomes brittle. One mistake in those conditions and people die. You're used to tropical heat and typhoons. This is different. I need you to understand the danger." Ramon nodded respectfully. "Captain, we understand. We'll follow all cold weather protocols." Lars continued, his tone not unkind but firm. "It's not just following protocols. It's having instinct for ice, for cold, for Arctic conditions. That comes from experience you don't have. I'll be watching everything closely because, in these waters, inexperience kills." The voyage began smoothly enough. The Norwegian sailed from Norway, loaded with equipment, bound for a Russian Arctic port. The first week went well as they entered colder waters. Lars noticed the Filipino crew adapting, layering clothing, learning ice watch procedures, adjusting to the brutal cold. They were professional, competent, but Lars remained skeptical. Competence in normal conditions wasn't the same as surviving Arctic emergencies. 2 weeks into the voyage, they entered the Barents Sea in late October. The weather forecast showed a low-pressure system developing, but nothing alarming. Lars had sailed through worse countless times. What the forecast didn't predict was how rapidly the system would intensify into a polar cyclone, a vicious Arctic storm that struck with devastating speed. Within 3 hours, winds reached 80 knots, temperatures plummeted to -35 Celsius, and sea spray instantly froze on every surface, adding tons of ice to the ship's superstructure. The Norwegian was being encased in ice. "All hands, start dicing operations," Lars commanded. The crew deployed with axes, hammers, steam hoses, trying to remove ice forming faster than they could clear it. Every surface was becoming covered: railings, equipment, the deck itself. Ice accumulation was the Arctic sailor's nightmare. Enough ice on the superstructure could make a ship top-heavy and capsize. Lars had seen it happen once, a vessel rolling over in minutes, crew trapped inside. The storm worsened. Visibility dropped to 0 in the blowing snow. Then the navigation equipment failed. Ice had penetrated the housing, moisture destroying the electronics. They lost GPS, radar, automated systems. The ship was blind in one of the most dangerous seas on Earth, surrounded by ice floes that could tear through the hull. Lars tried the radio. Dead ice had coated the antenna. They were alone, isolated, in conditions that were deteriorating by the hour. "Captain," his Norwegian first officer reported, voice tight with fear. "Ice accumulation is critical. We're listing 3 degrees to starboard already. If we can't stop the ice buildup, we'll capsize within hours." Lars felt genuine fear for the first time in his 30-year career. His experience told him they were in catastrophic danger. The manual said to maintain course, keep dicing, wait for the storm to pass. But the ice was accumulating too fast. The ship was becoming unstable, and they were blind, drifting toward an ice field they couldn't see. Ramon appeared at the bridge.com despite the chaos. "Captain, request permission to implement alternative ice management." Lars stared at him. "Alternative, Chief Officer, we're following standard Arctic storm protocols." Ramon interrupted gently but firmly. "With respect, Captain, those protocols assume you have equipment that works. Ours doesn't. The Filipino crew has been discussing. We have experience with typhoons, extreme weather at sea. Different from Arctic, yes, but some principles are the same. We have ideas." Lars wanted to refuse. These were tropical sailors trying to teach him about Arctic survival. But looking at his Norwegian officers' faces, he saw the same fear he felt. They were out of options. "What are you proposing?" Ramon explained quickly. "In typhoons, we learned that fighting the storm directly doesn't work. You adapt to it, use its energy. The ice is forming because sea spray hits cold surfaces. We can't stop the spray, but we can control where it hits. We create barriers, redirect the spray away from critical areas using tarps and rigging. Second, the ice on deck, we're trying to remove it. That's losing battle. Instead, we use it. We intentionally flood sections of deck with seawater, let it freeze in controlled way, create ballast weight low on the ship to counter the top-heavy ice. It's similar to how we manage water ballast in heavy seas." Lars's Norwegian training screamed this was insane, intentionally adding more ice. But Ramon's logic was sound. If they couldn't stop ice accumulation, they could control where it accumulated, using it as low ballast instead of letting it build up high on the superstructure. "And the navigation?" Lars asked. "We're blind in an ice field." Ramon's expression became more serious. "Captain, in Philippines, we navigate typhoons when all electronics fail. We use traditional methods, reading the waves, the wind, the way the ship moves. Arctic is different, yes, but water is water. Ice flows create patterns in the waves. We can feel them through the ship if we're paying attention. My bosun grew up fishing off Batane's northernmost Philippines, some of the roughest seas in Asia. He has instinct for reading water." Every instinct told Lars this was madness, but every rational thought told him they were already in a death scenario. The Filipino plan might be unconventional, might violate his 30 years of Arctic experience, but his experience was currently failing to save them. "Do it," Lars commanded. "Chief Officer Santos, you have operational control. All crew will follow his directions." The Filipino crew moved with startling speed and coordination. They rigged tarps and barriers that redirected spray away from the superstructure, while creating controlled flooding zones on the main deck. Seawater deliberately channeled to specific areas, freezing into solid ice that added weight low on the ship, counteracting the top-heavy ice buildup. It looked chaotic to Lars's eye, but within an hour, the dangerous listing began to stabilize. They communicated by hand signals to the helmsman, steering blind through the storm using instinct and experience Lars had never imagined could work in Arctic waters. But it did work. Hour after hour through the night, the Norwegian navigated the ice field without radar or GPS, guided by Filipino sailors using techniques adapted from typhoon survival and rough water fishing. The controlled ice ballast kept the ship stable even as more ice accumulated. The spray barriers prevented catastrophic top-heavy loading. By dawn, the storm began to break. Visibility slowly returned. Lars stared in disbelief at where they were. They'd navigated through a dense ice field. That would have destroyed them if they'd hit it blind. The Filipino crew had felt their way through using nothing but water sense and improvisation. The ship was encased in ice but stable, operational, safe. As the crew began clearing ice, now that the storm had passed, Lars found Ramon on the deck. "Chief Officer Santos, you saved this ship. You saved all of us. I said Filipinos couldn't handle Arctic waters. I was wrong. I was arrogantly, dangerously wrong." Ramon smiled tiredly. "Captain, you weren't completely wrong. We don't have Arctic experience. We've never worked these waters before. But we have something else: experience with survival at sea, when everything goes wrong, when equipment fails, when you have only your knowledge and your crew. In Philippines, we faced typhoons with old ships, limited equipment. We learned to adapt, to improvise, to read water and weather because we have no choice. Today, those skills just happen to work in ice instead of tropical storms." Lars shook his head in wonder. The controlled ice ballast, the spray barriers, the blind navigation, none of that is in any Arctic survival manual I've ever read. "Where did you learn it?" "We didn't learn it, Captain. We invented it. Today because we had to." Ramon's words hit Lars like a physical blow. These sailors he'd dismissed as inexperienced had improvised solutions to Arctic emergencies that his 30 years of experience hadn't prepared him for. They'd adapted tropical storm survival techniques to frozen seas, and it had worked better than his textbook protocols. When the Norwegian limped into the Russian port 2 days later, Lars filed a report that shocked the maritime industry. He detailed how his Filipino crew had saved the vessel using improvised techniques when standard Arctic protocols failed. He recommended that Filipino maritime innovation be studied and incorporated into Arctic training programs. The story spread through shipping companies worldwide. The tropical sailors who'd navigated an Arctic storm blind, who'd used ice as ballast instead of fighting it, who'd adapted typhoon survival techniques to polar waters and saved a ship that should have capsized. Maritime academies in Norway began inviting Filipino master mariners to teach adaptive navigation and improvised crisis management. Within 2 years, Lars had changed his entire perspective on Arctic crewing. He specifically requested Filipino officers for his Arctic routes, recognizing that their experience with operating in extreme conditions with limited resources made them extraordinarily capable when emergencies struck. He co-authored a paper titled Adaptive Maritime Skills: What Arctic Captains Can Learn from Tropical Storm Veterans. Ramon continued sailing Arctic routes, eventually earning his own command. And Lars, the Norwegian captain who'd said Filipinos couldn't handle Arctic waters, became their strongest advocate in the industry, telling anyone who'd listen, "I had 30 years of Arctic experience. My Filipino crew had 0. But when our survival depended on adapting to impossible conditions with failed equipment, their experience surviving Pacific typhoons proved more valuable than my Arctic textbook knowledge." The best sailors aren't the ones with the most experience in one environment. They're the ones who know how to survive anywhere.